There is a boy named Leo who did not speak a single word for the first 8 years of his life. Then he met a horse named Ghost. 3 days after Leo whispered his first word, a neighbor poured antifreeze into Ghost's trough because the sound of children laughing lowered her property value. Leo has not spoken since, not one syllable. And right now, he is standing in an empty arena, holding Ghost's halter, waiting for a voice that will not come back. This is not the story of one boy and one horse. It is the story of an equine therapy center that gave 60 autistic children their only bridge to language, and the neighbor who destroyed it because she could not stand the smell of manure near her property line. Her name is Karen Holloway. She runs the HOA with an iron fist and a designer handbag. The question that will haunt you is not whether she did it, but how a woman who poured poison into a watering trough is still walking free. This is what happened when a community that heals went to war. The community was Whispering Pines Equine Therapy Center, a non-profit operating out of a modest barn on 12 acres in unincorporated Jefferson County, Colorado. Founded in 2012 by a clinical psychologist named Dr. Elena Marquez, the center served 60 children every single week. Most arrived with severe nonverbal autism. Many had never spoken a word in their entire lives. The treatment was simple in theory, but profound in execution. A horse does not judge a child for flapping their hands or avoiding eye contact. It reads intention through weight, breath, and muscle tension. It invites communication without demanding it. For kids trapped behind walls of sensory overload, that invitation is everything. Dr. Marquez kept meticulous outcome data. 70% of her nonverbal clients achieved functional speech within 18 months of enrollment. Some spoke in full sentences. Others used single words that transformed their families. The center became a nationally recognized model. Research from the University of Colorado confirmed what Marquez observed daily: therapeutic riding reduces irritability, improves social responsiveness, and builds the neural architecture for language. Grant funding poured in. Families relocated to the county just to be near the barn. The future looked untouchable. Then Karen Holloway bought the property next door. She purchased a custom-built colonial in the adjacent Ridgeline Estates subdivision, a gated HOA community where every mailbox matched and every lawn was cut to exactly 2.5 inches. Karen immediately ran for HOA president and won unopposed. Her first official act was to file a nuisance complaint with the county. She claimed the therapy horses produced offensive odors that violated the neighborhood covenant. She demanded that the center install industrial filtration fans or relocate the manure pile entirely. A county inspector visited, sniffed the air, and wrote a report finding no actionable violation. The complaints continued anyway. Karen filed 18 of them in 6 months. Dr. Marquez tried diplomacy. She invited Karen to tour the facility, meet the children, and observe a session. Karen declined all invitations. Instead, she started photographing families from the property line. She posted warnings on the HOA Facebook page about property values plummeting next to a horse facility. She organized a petition to rezone the land, arguing the center was a commercial operation in a residential corridor. When the rezoning failed, she escalated again. She called animal control, EPA, and OSHA. Every agency reached the same conclusion: no violation existed. The center was compliant. But the paperwork alone began costing Dr. Marquez thousands of dollars in legal fees and staff hours. Throughout this siege, the therapy continued, and it was during those months of administrative hell that a boy named Leo achieved the impossible. Leo was 8 years old, diagnosed with level 3 autism, completely nonverbal. His parents had tried every intervention: speech therapy, occupational therapy, applied behavior analysis, and nothing unlocked a single word. The day of his breakthrough was a Tuesday morning in late September. Leo was sitting on a mounting block next to a gray gelding named Ghost, a former ranch horse with a calm temperament and enormous patient eyes. Without prompting, Leo reached out, touched Ghost's muzzle, and whispered a word. It was soft. His mother collapsed onto her knees. His therapist wept. Dr. Marquez recorded the moment in her outcome log. 3 days later, Karen Holloway walked onto the property after midnight, carrying a gallon jug of antifreeze and poured every drop into Ghost's water trough. The horse was found the next morning, collapsed in his stall, convulsing from acute ethylene glycol poisoning. The veterinarian arrived too late. Ghost was euthanized by 11 a.m. Within hours, Dr. Marquez discovered the surveillance footage from the barn security camera. It showed a woman in a dark hoodie, but the camera also caught the license plate of a white Mercedes registered to Karen Holloway. The sheriff was called. An arrest was made. But here is the part that will make your hands shake. That same afternoon, Leo was brought back to the barn. He walked into the empty arena, saw the empty stall, and picked up Ghost's halter. He did not cry. He did not scream. He stood perfectly still and completely silent. The word "soft" was the last sound he ever made. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office arrested Karen Holloway at her home on September 28, just before sunrise. Deputies found the empty antifreeze jug in her garage recycling bin, exactly where the security footage showed her carrying it. The bottle still had ethylene glycol residue. It was a slam dunk. Karen was booked on felony animal cruelty charges, plus trespassing and criminal mischief. Her mugshot showed her wearing a silk robe, expression frozen somewhere between fury and disbelief. She posted bail within 2 hours, $25,000 cash, and was back in her colonial by breakfast. The next morning, she fired off an email to the HOA board. The subject line read, "Malicious prosecution, emergency meeting required." The board called the meeting, but not for the reason Karen expected. Instead of rallying behind her, 3 board members resigned on the spot. One of them, a retired civil engineer named Alan Ritter, told neighbors he had reviewed the surveillance footage and was sickened. He called the sheriff's tip line and offered to testify. Another neighbor, a nurse named Deborah Walsh, spoke to the local news off camera. She said Karen had bragged for months about finding ways to shut down those horse people. She called the children loud distractions and the horses disease vectors. The HOA's internal emails, later obtained through a records request, showed Karen had proposed installing motion-activated sprinklers along the fence line to scare the horses. She wanted to hire a plane to spray insecticide over the arena during sessions. The board had rejected those ideas as insane, but no one thought Karen would escalate to murder. Ghost's death made national headlines. The story of a nonverbal boy losing his only voice to a neighbor's cruelty hit the collective nerve of every parent who has ever fought for a special needs child. Donations poured into Whispering Pines. A GoFundMe campaign raised $230,000 in 5 days. Cable news booked Dr. Marquez. Animal rights groups staged a protest outside the Ridgeline Estates gate. Karen hired a crisis public relations firm and a criminal defense attorney named Mitchell Hardesty, a man who had previously defended a puppy mill operator and a Greyhound track owner. Hardesty's first move was a masterclass in legal gaslighting. He announced that his client was the real victim, a law-abiding grandmother who had been terrorized by horse manure fumes and aggressive autistic children who had allegedly thrown rocks at her windows. The rock-throwing claim was entirely fabricated, but the story spread fast on social media. Then the smear campaign began. Anonymous accounts posted videos of Karen allegedly being harassed by therapy center parents. A website appeared, Ridgeline Safety Watch, featuring photos of children with their faces blurred, but their diagnoses listed in captions like Rage Trigger Child and Biter, age 7. The posts called Dr. Marquez a fraud who manufactured false abuse claims to raise money. The center's Yelp page was flooded with 1-star reviews from accounts that had never visited Colorado. Parents of autistic children are not easily intimidated, but this was different. They were terrified. 2 families pulled their kids from the program. Others installed security cameras at home, worried their own addresses would be leaked. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Karen stalled. Hardesty filed motion after motion. He argued the security footage was inadmissible because the camera was aimed at a location where Karen had an expectation of privacy, despite the fact that she was standing in an open barn aisle. He petitioned to suppress the antifreeze jug, claiming the deputies had searched her recycling bin without probable cause. The judge, a former corporate litigator named Edward Hollings, who had received campaign contributions from real estate developers, scheduled the suppression hearing for late January, nearly 4 months after the arrest. Karen remained free on bond. She continued attending HOA meetings, where she introduced a motion to increase the fence height to 12 feet. It passed. But here is what Karen did not know. While she was filing motions and writing unhinged HOA newsletters, Dr. Marquez was gathering her own evidence. She had hired a forensic veterinarian to re-examine Ghost's remains. The initial report showed ethylene glycol toxicity. The deeper investigation found something far more disturbing. The antifreeze in Ghost's system was not the standard green variety. It was a specialized marine-grade antifreeze with a blue dye, a product only sold at marine supply stores. And the receipt for that exact product, purchased 3 days before the poisoning, had been found in a search warrant executed on Karen's husband's boat. His name was Richard Holloway, a retired investment banker who had been silent throughout the entire ordeal. He had a 28-foot cabin cruiser docked at Chatfield Reservoir. The receipt sat in a folder on his boat, time-stamped and serial numbered, and it painted a picture of a crime that had not been committed alone. But even that was not the worst thing Dr. Marquez discovered. During the discovery process, her attorney subpoenaed the security footage from the HOA's community entrance gate. That footage showed Karen's white Mercedes returning to the neighborhood at 1:14 a.m. the night of the poisoning. It also showed a second vehicle entering behind her, a black BMW registered to Ridgeline Capital Partners, a property investment firm run by a man named Gregory Toland. Toland was a silent partner in the development group that owned the remaining vacant lots in Ridgeline Estates. He had been trying to flip the land for a luxury condo project, but his investors had gotten nervous. The therapy center, with its muddy paddock and 60 special needs children, was depressing pre-sale numbers. Toland had been pressuring Karen to solve the problem, and Karen, it turned out, had been taking very detailed notes on that pressure. The HOA board secretary had archived everything. The connection between Toland and Karen transformed the case from a deranged neighbor dispute into something far darker. It was a calculated land grab. The poisoning was not just about manure smell or property values. It was about Karen Holloway acting as a proxy for a developer who wanted the therapy center gone so he could build condos. And that developer had the resources to bury the truth, which is exactly what happened next. Dr. Marquez walked into the barn on a Monday morning to find a court summons taped to the door. Karen had filed a civil suit against her and the therapy center for emotional distress and interference with quiet enjoyment. The damages claimed were $4.7 million. 8 days later, Ghost's halter vanished from the arena, and no one ever found it again. The theft of the halter broke something inside Dr. Marquez that the lawsuit could not touch. She had already watched Ghost die. She had watched Leo retreat into silence, but the halter was the last physical object that connected the boy to the horse that had given him his voice. She searched the barn for 3 days. She checked dumpsters, drainage ditches, the compost pile. She asked every parent and volunteer. No one had seen anything. Then the anonymous emails started arriving. One appeared every morning at exactly 6 a.m. The first read, "Ghost wasn't the only one who will disappear." The second, "Your kids aren't safe near that fence." The third contained a photograph of Leo's house with the front door circled in red. Dr. Marquez forwarded everything to the sheriff, but the emails were routed through encrypted servers. The IP addresses traced back to a coffee shop in downtown Denver. The investigation went nowhere. Meanwhile, the civil suit was draining the center's finances. Even though the claims were absurd, Hardesty had filed them in a way that forced discovery. Dr. Marquez had to produce thousands of pages of records, therapy notes, tax returns, grant applications, emails. Her attorney, a woman named Jada Parks who specialized in nonprofit defense, estimated the center would spend at least $80,000 just responding to the suit, regardless of whether they won. The GoFundMe money covered the immediate legal bills, but Karen was fighting a war of attrition, and she didn't need to win in court. She just needed to outlast them. Donors started pulling back when the Ridgeline Safety Watch website posted an article claiming the center was under federal investigation for financial fraud. The investigation was a lie, but the headline was already screenshotted and shared 2,000 times. The families were fracturing. Some wanted to fight publicly, others wanted to retreat and protect their children from the relentless harassment. Leo's mother, Andrea, stopped bringing him to the barn entirely. She told Dr. Marquez that her son had started having night terrors, screaming without sound in his sleep. The family therapist said Leo associated the barn with loss. He understood more than anyone realized. He knew Ghost was dead. He knew the halter was gone. He was 8 years old and nonverbal, and his entire world had been reduced to a silent pattern of grief he could not articulate. Andrea said she was considering moving out of state. She could not bear to drive past the Ridgeline Estates gate every day and see Karen's Mercedes parked in the driveway. Then in early November, the first crack in Karen's armor appeared. It came from an unexpected source, Richard Holloway, her own husband. Richard had been a quiet man, a retired investment banker who spent his weekends on the boat and his weekdays avoiding his wife. The discovery that his boat receipt tied him to the poisoning had apparently rattled him. He hired his own attorney, separate from Hardesty, and filed for divorce. The divorce petition cited irreconcilable differences, but the real reason leaked through a family friend. Richard had been terrified that Karen would frame him entirely. She had already told the detectives that Richard bought the antifreeze for the boat's engine. She claimed she had nothing to do with the poisoning. But Richard had time-stamped photos proving he was on a fishing trip with 2 buddies the night Ghost died. He had an airtight alibi, and he was done covering for a woman who had turned their marriage into a criminal conspiracy. Richard's attorney, sensing leverage, offered to cooperate with prosecutors. In a sealed deposition, he revealed that Karen had been obsessed with the therapy center from the moment she moved in. She had called it the Barn of Freaks. She had kept a journal documenting every perceived slight: the sound of children screaming during meltdowns, the dust kicked up by horses in the arena, the delivery trucks that blocked the entrance road. She had written detailed fantasies about shutting it down. And critically, she had recorded a phone call with Gregory Toland in which he promised to finance her legal defense and pay off her debts if she found a way to remove the center permanently. The word permanently was circled twice in her journal. Richard turned over the journal, the recordings, and a series of text messages between Karen and Toland that discussed the manure problem as early as 6 months before the poisoning. One message from Toland read, "Sometimes accidents happen on farms. Horses get sick. It's not uncommon." Karen had replied, "I'm working on it." This evidence was a bomb, but Jada Parks needed to deploy it strategically. She took the materials directly to the district attorney, a man named Michael Corbin, who was facing a tough re-election campaign. Corbin had been cautious about the case because Karen's attorneys were threatening to sue the county for wrongful prosecution. Now, with Richard's cooperation and the Toland connection, he had enough to upgrade the charges from felony animal cruelty to conspiracy to commit criminal mischief, plus witness tampering and solicitation of a crime. He also opened a separate investigation into Gregory Toland and Ridgeline Capital Partners, but Jada knew that criminal charges would take years to resolve. The center needed immediate relief from the civil suit, and she needed public opinion to shift decisively. She reached out to an investigative reporter at the Denver Post named Leila Vance. Vance had covered land use scandals before. She spent 2 weeks digging through property records, campaign contributions, and court filings. What she found tied everything together. Gregory Toland had contributed $45,000 to Judge Hollings' re-election campaign, the same judge who had delayed the suppression hearing and kept Karen free on bond. Toland had also paid for Karen's initial bond through a shell company. And the Ridgeline Estates HOA had received a loan from a Toland-affiliated LLC to fund its legal defense fund, a fund that had been used to hire the same PR firm running the smear campaign against the therapy center. Vance's article ran on a Sunday morning. The headline read, "How a Real Estate Tycoon and an HOA President Conspired to Destroy a Children's Therapy Center." The story included screenshots of Karen's journal entries, quotes from Richard's deposition, and a timeline of Toland's financial interest in the land. Within hours, The article had been shared 100,000 times. By Monday morning, 3 more HOA board members had resigned. Alan Ritter, the retired engineer, called an emergency community meeting and proposed a vote to remove Karen as president. The motion passed unanimously. Security guards at the gate were instructed to deny her entry to the clubhouse. Her Mercedes was egged. A sign appeared on her lawn, planted in the dead of night, that read, "Horse Killer." But the real blow came when Leela Vance published a follow-up exposing Toland's entire scheme. His condo project had been contingent on the therapy center's land being rezoned commercial. The rezoning had stalled because the county board was sympathetic to the center's mission. Toland had believed that if the center became a public nuisance, the board would withdraw its support. Karen was just the weapon. Toland had paid her $50,000 in cash, delivered in a manila envelope at a Denver steakhouse, to make the center's existence unbearable. The receipt for the envelope was still in his accounting records, obtained through a whistleblower in his finance department. The money was labeled Community Relations Consulting. There was no consulting. There was only a horse trough full of antifreeze and a child who would never speak again. The revelation hit the national news cycle. CNN, NBC, and Fox all ran segments. A photo of Leo holding Ghost's halter, taken before the theft, circulated online and became the symbol of the story. Donations to the center reached $1 million. A celebrity with an autistic child pledged to cover all legal fees. The DA filed additional charges against Karen and indicted Toland on racketeering and conspiracy. Judge Hollings recused himself from the case, citing a need to avoid the appearance of impropriety, but the damage to his reputation was done. He lost his re-election bid 6 months later, and on a cold December morning, Dr. Marquez received a phone call that changed everything. The sheriff had found Ghost's halter. It was not in a dumpster or a drainage ditch. It had been hidden inside Karen Holloway's garage, wrapped in a plastic bag, next to a second jug of antifreeze with the seal still intact. They had video of her taking it from the barn at 3 a.m., the night after the civil suit was filed. She had kept it as a trophy, and that single piece of evidence was about to send her to prison. The halter was logged into evidence at 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Within an hour, the DA upgraded Karen's charges to first-degree animal cruelty, stalking, and felony menacing of a child. Her bail was revoked. When deputies arrived at her house, she refused to open the door, so they breached it. They found her in the master bathroom, flushing pages from her journal down the toilet. She was arrested on the spot, still wearing the same silk robe from her first mugshot, and this time there was no cash bond to bail her out before breakfast. She spent the next 14 months in the Jefferson County Detention Center awaiting trial. Her attorney tried every delay tactic left, but the new judge, a no-nonsense former prosecutor named Maria Okonkwo, denied every motion. The trial date was set for February of the following year. The trial itself lasted 3 weeks, and the courtroom was packed every single day. Parents sat in the gallery holding photographs of their children on horseback. Leo's mother Andrea was there, wearing a pendant with Ghost's name engraved. Richard Holloway testified for the prosecution, detailing his wife's obsession and the night she returned home smelling of manure and engine coolant. The forensic veterinarian walked the jury through the chemistry of ethylene glycol poisoning, explaining how Ghost suffered renal failure, seizures, and cardiac arrest over the course of 4 agonizing hours. The surveillance footage was played. Karen's journal entries were read aloud. And then the halter was presented, still sealed in its evidence bag, and the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Karen sat at the defense table, her expression frozen in the same mask of mild surprise she had worn the day she was first arrested. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Judge Okonkwo sentenced Karen Holloway to 18 years in state prison, the maximum allowed under Colorado law. She also ordered restitution of $1.2 million to Whispering Pines Equine Therapy Center and a permanent injunction barring Karen from ever contacting the families. Gregory Toland accepted a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison for racketeering and conspiracy, plus forfeiture of all his development interests in Ridgeline Estates. His condo project was permanently cancelled. The vacant lots he had tried to flip were purchased by a conservation trust and donated to the therapy center. But justice does not always heal the wounds that matter most. For months after the trial, Leo remained silent. Andrea brought him to the barn every Saturday, hoping that familiarity would spark something. He would walk through the arena, touch the fence posts, and stare at the empty stall where Ghost used to stand. He did not cry, he did not gesture. He simply existed in the space, a boy sealed behind glass that no one could break. Dr. Marquez considered retiring. The legal battle had exhausted her. The center was financially secure now, but the emotional cost had hollowed her out. She kept Ghost's halter in a glass case in her office, visible from the barn entrance, and every morning she would pause in front of it and ask herself why she was still doing this work. One morning, about 6 months after the trial, a local rancher named Tom Bridger arrived at the barn with a trailer. Inside was a 4-year-old gray gelding, a Mustang from the BLM adoption program, with a calm eye and a white blaze down his face. His name was Echo. Bridger had read about Ghost in the news. He said the horse had been sitting on his ranch for a year, too gentle to sell to a working outfit, and he figured he might as well donate him to a place that needed something gentle. Dr. Marquez accepted. She did not advertise the new horse or plan any kind of ceremony. She simply put Echo in the stall next to Ghost's old one and let the routine settle back into place. The first time Leo met Echo, he showed no interest. He walked past the stall without turning his head. The second time, he paused. The third time, he reached out his hand and touched the white patch on Echo's muzzle. Andrea held her breath, but no words came. That was fine. Dr. Marquez told Andrea that healing does not announce itself. It arrives slowly, like the sound of rain starting miles away. She did not push, she did not force, she just kept the barn doors open. Then, on a Thursday morning in early October, nearly 1 year to the day after Ghost died, Leo walked into the arena, picked up Echo's halter from the fence post, and said a single word. It was not soft. It was again. Andrea collapsed. Dr. Marquez, standing in the observation booth, dropped her coffee. Leo had never said that word before, not even during his first breakthrough with Ghost. It was new, it was forward. It was a boy telling the world he was ready to start over. The halter Leo held was not Ghost, but a new one, given to him by the center's volunteers a week earlier. They had embroidered Echo's name on the noseband, and Leo had watched them do it without making a sound. Now he was holding it the way a conductor holds a baton. The hard truth of this story is that Karen Holloway did not permanently silence Leo. She delayed him, terrified him, wounded him in ways that will never fully vanish. But the science of equine therapy is not built on miracles. It is built on the fact that horses do not care about a child's diagnosis. They respond to breath, weight, and presence. When Leo whispered again, he was not forgetting Ghost. He was carrying Ghost forward into a relationship with Echo that no one could steal, not even a woman with antifreeze and a journal full of hate. The center today is thriving. Whispering Pines expanded its facilities using the restitution funds and donations. They built a new indoor arena, added 4 more therapy horses, and hired additional staff. Dr. Marquez established the Ghost Memorial Scholarship, which provides free equine therapy to low-income families with autistic children. 26 kids are currently on the wait list. Every one of them will eventually ride because the center refuses to turn anyone away. The HOA that Karen once ruled was dissolved by community vote. The Ridgeline Estates sign was removed, and the neighborhood was reincorporated under a new name chosen by the residents, Bridle Path Estates. There is no gate, no matching mailboxes, and no Karen Holloway. But there is a detail you need to hear before this ends, something that never made it into the news coverage. When the sheriff searched Karen's garage and found Ghost's halter, they also found a folder. Inside were photographs of every single child enrolled at the therapy center, printed from the center's public social media pages, with their diagnoses and treatment schedules handwritten on the back. She had been planning something larger than a single horse. The folder also contained a receipt for 47 gallons of antifreeze, enough to poison every animal on the property. The only reason she stopped at one was that a neighbor's motion sensor light had triggered while she was pouring the first gallon, and she panicked and left. The security system, which Karen had personally voted against funding at the HOA board meeting, was the single thing that saved the rest of the herd, and possibly the children themselves. The neighbor who installed that light was Deborah Walsh, the nurse who had spoken off-camera to the news. She had done it because she was tired of Karen's intimidation. She didn't know it would stop a massacre. She just wanted to feel safe walking to her car at night. That one small act of defiance prevented the destruction of an entire community. What Karen Holloway never understood, and what Gregory Toland certainly never understood, is that cruelty is ultimately a fragile weapon. It looks powerful, but it shatters against people who are willing to keep records, build networks, and refuse to abandon the ones they love. The families of Whispering Pines did not win because they had more money. They won because they had more documentation. Leo's word, again, was not just a return to language. It was a declaration that the story was not over. And that is the difference between someone who takes and someone who builds. Leo said again, but the question that lingers is how many other children are trapped behind walls built by people like Karen Holloway, not just children with autism, anyone who has ever been targeted by someone who mistakes cruelty for strength. The families of Whispering Pines did not win because they had an army of lawyers or a bottomless legal fund. They won because one nurse installed a motion sensor light, because one husband kept receipts from his fishing trip, because one reporter dug through property records on a hunch, because a mother named Andrea refused to let her son's silence be the end of his story, and because a woman named Dr. Marquez treated her fight the way she treated her therapy sessions, by showing up every single day, documenting everything, and refusing to hand the reins to someone who meant harm. Systems of power depend on the belief that ordinary people will not push back. But when they do, and when they document every step, the Karen Holloways and the Gregory Tolands eventually run out of antifreeze and legal motions. They end up behind bars, while the boy they tried to bury whispers his first word in a barn that never closed its doors. So here is my question for you. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor, an HOA, or a bully who believed the rules did not apply to them? Did you fight back, or did you let the weight of their power push you into retreat? Drop your story in the comments. This channel exists to prove that the little guy can win, but only if we share the blueprints. Every comment you leave, every story you tell, every time-stamped receipt you archive is ammunition for someone else who is sitting at their kitchen table right now, wondering if they should just give up. And if this story reminded you that justice is not something you wait for, it is something you construct with your own hands, hit that subscribe button. Next week, I am covering the true story of a small-town contractor who took on a billion-dollar utility company after they poisoned his family's well. You will not believe the evidence he kept in a shoebox for 12 years. See you then. And remember, keep your receipts, all of them.